Hey, everyone. I don't really know why I'm writing this out here. Maybe I just need to get it off my chest. A lot's happened in my life, and even though I'm living in Hawaii now, soaking up the sun, I still carry this weight. It's wild to think about how 1 minute your life's a complete disaster, and the next you're holding a $250 million Powerball ticket. But before that jackpot, my life was nothing but wreckage. Let me start at the beginning, I guess. I was married to Sheila for almost 15 years. We met back in college. She was beautiful, charming, had a way of making you feel like you were the only guy in the room. I was hooked, man. Thought I was the luckiest guy alive. Fast forward a bit, we had a house, decent jobs, I worked in marketing, and what I thought was a stable life. But over time, things started to unravel. I lost my job first, a sudden downsizing at the company. They didn't even give me a warning. One day, I was working on a big project, and the next I was walking out with a cardboard box, wondering what the hell just happened. I was unemployed for a while, which put a lot of strain on us. I tried to make things work, but Sheila's attitude changed. She got cold, distant. She started lying about where she was going, who she was with. I didn't want to believe anything was wrong at first. I was that stupidly loyal guy who thought everything could be fixed. Turns out, Sheila wasn't just working late or grabbing drinks with friends. One night, I confronted her about it. She got all defensive, flipped the script on me, like I was the one being crazy for questioning her. But deep down, I knew. You know when you just know? 2 weeks after that argument, she packed her bags, told me she found someone else, someone more exciting, as if I was the dull, washed-up guy who couldn't keep up. She walked out just like that, left me standing there like an idiot. I had nothing, no job, no wife, and honestly not much hope. I don't think I've ever felt that low in my entire life. That should have been it, right? The point where I spiral and lose everything. And I did for a while. After Sheila left, I spiraled pretty hard. I couldn't find a job, and I was drowning in debt. I even thought about selling the house, but the market wasn't great, and I didn't want to lose what little stability I had left. I spent my days sending out resumes, hearing nothing back, and my nights staring at the ceiling, wondering what went wrong. Honestly, it felt like my life had just stopped. I started seeing things about Sheila on social media. She was with this new guy, Greg or Jeff or something. He looked like one of those guys who never worked a real job in his life, but somehow had everything handed to him. They were out at fancy restaurants, going on weekend trips. Sheila seemed happy, glowing in all the pictures. It made me sick to see her so carefree while I was stuck in this rut. One day, I decided to get out of the house. I wasn't sure what I was going to do, maybe go for a drive, clear my head. But on a whim, I stopped at a gas station. I had a few bucks left in my pocket, so I bought a Powerball ticket. Not that I expected anything. I mean, who really wins those things? I didn't even check the numbers that night. It wasn't until the next morning, when I was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, that I decided to see how badly I'd lost. But as I went through the numbers one by one, I realized something. They all matched. Every single one. I can't even explain what it felt like in that moment. I was shaking, my heart pounding. I checked the numbers again and then again. There was no way this could be real. But it was. I had won $250 million. I didn't scream or jump up and down like you see in those lottery commercials. I just sat there, completely stunned, staring at that ticket like it was some kind of magic key. And, in a way, it was. Everything was about to change. A few weeks later, after all the legal stuff was sorted out, I was sitting on $250 million. Sheila, of course, found out through the grapevine. She even had the nerve to text me, pretending to be all concerned about how I was doing, like she cared. I ignored her. I didn't owe her anything, especially not after what she put me through. With that kind of money, I could have done anything. And after all the crap I'd been through, I wanted a fresh start. So I sold the house, packed up whatever was left of my old life, and moved to Hawaii. I figured if I was going to rebuild, I might as well do it somewhere beautiful, right? Life in Hawaii was paradise at first. I bought a huge house overlooking the ocean, had a few nice cars, went on all the adventures I'd always dreamed about. It was like I had finally made it. But as great as it was, there was this nagging feeling that I couldn't shake. Something was missing. And that's when I met Bella. It was just a regular morning. I was sitting in a Starbucks, sipping on my overpriced latte, scrolling through my phone like I didn't have a care in the world. Life was good, or at least it should have been. But something about being surrounded by tourists and locals, all living their lives, made me feel kind of disconnected. Then I noticed her. She couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, sitting at one of the small tables near the window. At first, I thought maybe her parents were just in the bathroom or something. But as the minutes ticked by, no one came for her. She sat there quietly, staring out the window, clutching a stuffed animal in one hand and a crumpled napkin in the other. Something didn't feel right. I watched for a little while longer, and when no one showed up, I got up and walked over. I crouched down next to her and said, "Hey, are you okay? Where's your mom and dad?" She looked up at me with these big, terrified eyes and said something, but it wasn't in English. It took me a second to realize she was speaking Italian. Now, I don't speak a word of Italian, but even without understanding her, I could tell she was scared and alone. I looked around, hoping maybe someone else in the coffee shop would know what to do, but no one was paying attention. People were too busy with their laptops and phones to notice a little girl sitting there all by herself. I tried again, slower this time. "Do you need help? Where are your parents?" She just shook her head and kept holding that stuffed animal like it was her lifeline. I was at a complete loss for what to do. I couldn't just leave her there, and she clearly couldn't tell me what was going on. So I decided to stay with her, at least until someone came back for her. I sat down at the table next to hers, trying to look reassuring. After what felt like hours, it became clear no one was coming. I waved over one of the baristas, who told me they hadn't seen anyone with the girl either. She'd just wandered in on her own. I couldn't leave her like that. So I called the police, thinking they'd be able to sort it out. When they arrived, the officers tried talking to her, but it was the same story. She didn't understand them, and they didn't understand her. They asked me if I knew anything about her, and when I explained how I found her, they said they'd have to take her in, try to locate her family. But as the officers moved closer to her, she panicked. She clung to me, tears streaming down her face, refusing to let go. The cops tried to be gentle, but she wouldn't go with them. I don't know what came over me, but I told them I'd go with her. I couldn't just hand her off to strangers. They agreed, as long as I stuck around to help with the process. And that's how I ended up riding with a little lost Italian girl to the police station. Her name was Bella. I learned later from the few words she was able to say that I could understand. But other than that, there was nothing. No identification, no parents, nothing to explain how she ended up alone in a Starbucks on the other side of the world. What I didn't know at the time was that meeting Bella was about to change everything. At the station, Bella wouldn't leave my side. The officers tried talking to her, but the language barrier made everything slow and frustrating. They ran her picture through missing persons databases, but nothing came up. No reports, no parents calling in. It was like she had just appeared out of nowhere. After a few hours, the police said they'd keep her overnight in a child services facility until they could figure out what to do. But the minute they said it, Bella grabbed my hand tighter, her eyes wide with fear. The look on her face, it was like she thought they were taking her away for good. I couldn't shake that feeling. "Is there any way I can take her for now?" I asked. The officers looked at me like I was crazy. I mean, I get it, some random guy offering to take a kid home? It didn't exactly sound great on paper, but I couldn't just leave her there, terrified and alone. After a lot of back and forth, they eventually agreed to let me take temporary custody, under the condition that I check in regularly, and they keep working on finding her family. So, there I was, single, living in a beach house in Hawaii, and now responsible for a little girl who didn't speak English. It was surreal, to say the least. The first few days were tough. Bella barely spoke, even in Italian, and she didn't trust anyone except me. I tried everything to make her feel comfortable. got her new clothes, set up a room for her, bought her toys. But she'd sit quietly, playing with that same stuffed animal, keeping her distance. I knew I needed help. That's when I found Gina, a local Italian tutor. I wasn't sure what to expect when I called her, but she was warm and understanding, and she agreed to come over and help with the language barrier. The first time Gina arrived, Bella was hesitant, but something about Gina's calm, friendly demeanor seemed to ease her. They started speaking in Italian, and Bella finally opened up a little. Gina told me later that Bella had been through something terrible. She didn't go into details right away, said it was too soon, but she hinted that Bella had been mistreated, maybe even kidnapped. The thought of that made me sick to my stomach. I had no idea what kind of trauma this little girl had endured, but I knew I had to do everything I could to protect her. As the days passed, Bella began to warm up to me. She'd follow me around the house, sometimes reaching out to hold my hand. I taught her a few simple English words, and Gina kept coming over to help with the bigger conversations. Bella would even smile now and then, something I didn't think I'd see so soon. It was strange, though, every time the police checked in they had no new leads. No one seemed to be looking for Bella, no records, nothing. It was as if her life before the Starbucks just didn't exist. And with each day, I felt more and more like she was supposed to be with me. I couldn't explain it, but it was like we were meant to find each other. And then came the day when Bella called me Papa for the first time. I was speechless. It hit me harder than I expected. I wasn't her father. I barely even knew how to take care of a kid. But in her eyes, I was her protector, her family. And from that moment on, I knew there was no turning back. Bella was staying with me. After that day, things started to change. Bella, who had been so quiet and withdrawn, was finally coming out of her shell. She'd laugh when I tried to speak Italian, terribly I might add, and she'd drag me to the beach, pointing out seashells and chasing the waves like she'd never seen the ocean before. It felt like I was finally giving her a chance at a real childhood. Gina, the Italian tutor, became a regular part of our lives. At first, she was just there to help Bella with the language and ease her into learning some English. But as time went on, Gina and I started spending more time together. She'd stay after lessons, chatting with me over coffee, and before I knew it, she became a friend. Bella adored her, too. She'd light up every time Gina came over, like she was the big sister or even the mother figure Bella desperately needed. And honestly, I was starting to feel something for Gina, too. I hadn't really thought about romance after everything that happened with Sheila. But Gina was different. She was kind, patient, and had this calming presence that I hadn't realized I needed. One evening, after Bella had gone to bed, Gina stayed a little later than usual. We sat on the patio, the sound of the waves in the distance, just talking about life. I told her more about what had happened with Sheila, how she'd left me for another man, how it nearly broke me, and how winning the lottery felt like a second chance, even though it couldn't fix everything. Gina listened quietly, then told me about her own past. She had moved to Hawaii from Italy a few years ago, hoping for a fresh start after a rough divorce. It felt like we understood each other in a way no one else could. Both of us had been through hell, and here we were, trying to rebuild our lives in this strange, beautiful place. That night, as she was leaving, Gina stopped at the door, turned to me and smiled. "You're a good man, Jim. Bella's lucky to have you." I didn't know what to say. I wasn't sure if I was a good man. I was just trying to figure things out as I went, but hearing that from Gina, it meant something. It was like, for the first time in years, I was actually doing something right. Things with Bella continued to get better. She was learning more English, and we settled into a routine. We'd go to the beach in the mornings. Then Gina would come over for lessons in the afternoons. In the evenings, Bella and I would watch cartoons, with me half understanding the Italian versions. It was simple, but it felt like a real life, a real family. But I couldn't shake this feeling that something wasn't right. The police still hadn't found any trace of Bella's past. It was like she had just disappeared from wherever she came from. Gina and I talked about it one night, and she admitted she was worried, too. Bella's story wasn't adding up. That's when Gina suggested we dig deeper, try to find out who Bella really was and what had happened to her before she ended up alone in that Starbucks. Little did I know, that search for answers would lead us down a path I wasn't prepared for. The more I thought about it, the more it gnawed at me. Bella deserved answers, and so did I. Gina was right. We couldn't just sit around and hope the past would stay buried. So, we started looking into it ourselves. Gina had some connections back in Italy, friends who could dig into local records, try to trace Bella's history. I didn't think we'd find much, but it was worth a shot. In the meantime, I kept trying to piece together anything I could from Bella's memories, but it wasn't easy. She was only 6, and she didn't seem to remember much before showing up at the Starbucks. Every time I asked about her parents or where she came from, she'd just shrug or go quiet. One day, about 2 weeks into our search, Gina called me, sounding urgent. "Jim, I think we found something." She came over that evening, her face serious, holding a stack of papers. Apparently, one of her friends had found a missing persons report in Italy from a few years back. The report was for a little girl named Isabella, who disappeared when she was only 3 years old. The picture they sent was blurry, but it was unmistakable. It was Bella. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. "She was kidnapped?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Gina nodded. "It looks that way. Her family's from a small town near Rome. They reported her missing, but no one ever found any clues. Until now." Suddenly, everything made sense. The fear Bella had when the police tried to take her, the way she clung to me, like she didn't trust anyone else. My heart broke for her. She had been through so much more than I ever realized. The next few days were a blur. I contacted the authorities in Italy, and they began coordinating with the local police here. They confirmed it. Bella, or Isabella, had been taken from her family years ago and somehow ended up halfway across the world, alone in a Starbucks. But here's the thing. Even though we had all this information, no one knew where her original kidnappers were or how she'd made it to Hawaii. It was a tangled mess, and there were still a lot of unanswered questions. The hardest part was knowing that Bella had a family out there, somewhere in Italy. A family that had been searching for her for years, probably thinking they'd never see her again. And here I was, this random guy who found her by pure chance. It didn't seem fair. I struggled with what to do next. Part of me knew that I had to contact her real family, but another part of me didn't want to let her go. Bella had become my life. She was my family now too. One night after Bella had fallen asleep, Gina and I sat on the patio again. She could see the conflict in my eyes. "You're doing the right thing," she said softly. "I know you don't want to lose her, but Bella deserves to know where she came from." "I know," I sighed, staring out at the ocean. "But what if she doesn't want to leave? What if she's better off here with us?" Gina didn't have an answer, and honestly, neither did I. The next day, I made the hardest phone call of my life, to Bella's biological family in Italy. They were overwhelmed, emotional. They wanted to come to Hawaii right away. But deep down, I wasn't ready to say goodbye to her. Not yet. The reunion was inevitable, but little did I know, it would also reveal even darker truths about Bella's past. Bella's biological family arrived in Hawaii about a week after that phone call. I remember standing at the airport, nervous as hell, wondering how this was going to go. Bella still didn't know the full story. How do you even explain something like that to a 6-year-old? I had no clue. When they stepped off the plane, I immediately recognized her mother, Maria. She had the same dark hair, the same eyes as Bella. Her father, Paolo, was right behind her, looking both anxious and relieved. They'd brought Bella's little brother too. He was just a baby when she disappeared. Maria rushed toward me, tears in her eyes, and hugged me before I could even get a word out. "Grazie, grazie," she kept repeating. I couldn't understand much of what she said, but I didn't need to. Her emotions said it all. We drove back to my house, and I could see them looking around, taking in the beauty of Hawaii. But their minds were clearly on one thing, seeing Bella. I felt a lump in my throat as we pulled into the driveway. Gina had been staying with Bella while I was at the airport, trying to keep her calm, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. When we walked into the house, Bella was sitting on the floor with Gina, playing with her stuffed animal. When she looked up and saw Maria and Paolo, her face froze. She didn't recognize them. Not at first. Maria knelt down, calling out softly, "Isabella mia cara?" Bella stood there, gripping her stuffed animal tightly, staring at these strangers. Then slowly something clicked. She stepped forward, hesitating, before finally rushing into her mother's arms. Maria was sobbing, hugging her so tightly, like she never wanted to let go again. I should have felt relief, maybe even happiness, watching that reunion. But I didn't. I felt like a piece of me was being torn away. Bella had been my world for months now, and suddenly I was on the outside looking in. The rest of the evening was a blur of emotions. Bella's parents tried to explain who they were, showing her old photos, trying to jog her memories of Italy, of her life before everything went wrong. But Bella kept glancing at me, confused. I could see it in her eyes. She didn't understand why she had to choose between us. The hardest part was bedtime. Maria and Paolo wanted Bella to sleep with them at their hotel, but she clung to me, crying, not wanting to leave my side. It broke me to see her so torn between two worlds. In the end, we compromised. Bella stayed with me for the night, and I promised her parents we'd talk more tomorrow. That night, I barely slept. I lay there thinking about how quickly everything had changed. One minute, I was her whole world, and the next I was sharing her with people I'd never met. The next day, we had a long talk, Maria, Paolo, Gina, and me. They were grateful beyond words, but they made it clear they wanted to take Bella back to Italy. That's where her real life was, they said. But I wasn't ready to let her go. I couldn't. I've been her father for months, I told them. She calls me Papa. I can't just let her go like that. Maria looked torn. She understood, I could see it. But Paolo, he was more firm. She is our daughter, he said quietly. We've waited years to bring her home. I knew it wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what was best for Bella. But deep down, I couldn't help but feel like I was losing her. And it was only going to get worse. The next few days were a painful waiting game. Bella was torn between her parents and me, and I could see how confused and scared she was. But as much as it hurt, I knew I had to prepare for the inevitable, saying goodbye to the little girl who had become my whole life. The days after Bella's parents arrived were tense. Bella was stuck in this weird in-between, and it was like she didn't know where she belonged. She spent most of her time with me and Gina, but her parents were always around, trying to reconnect with her, trying to get her to remember the life she had before. Bella didn't remember much, though. Whenever they brought up Italy or showed her old pictures, she'd just get quiet. She was still so young when it all happened, and it was clear those memories were fading. Her attachment was with me now. Every night, she'd still ask to sleep in my house, and I could see the hurt in her parents' eyes every time. It was heartbreaking. Maria and Paolo weren't bad people. They were just parents desperate to get their daughter back. I got that. But Bella wasn't the same little girl they'd lost. She'd been through so much, and she needed time to adjust. Gina was my rock during all this. Every time I felt like I was losing Bella, she'd remind me that we had to do what was best for her. But deep down I was terrified. I knew her parents wanted to take her back to Italy. They weren't saying it outright, but it was there hanging in the air every time we talked. I tried to prepare myself for the worst, but how do you prepare to lose someone you love like that? I couldn't. Every time I looked at Bella, I thought about how she'd called me Papa that first time, and I felt sick thinking it might all be ripped away. One afternoon, Paolo pulled me aside. He was calm but direct. "Jim," he said, "we appreciate everything you've done for our daughter, but we want to take her home to Italy." I stared at him, the words hitting me like a punch to the gut. "She's happy here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't think pulling her away from this life is the right thing for her." Paolo didn't argue, but I could see the determination in his eyes. He wasn't going to give up. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just fighting for Bella anymore. I was fighting to be her father. The situation was spiraling, and I knew I was running out of time to figure out what was best for her. I just didn't know if I had the strength to do what that really meant. As the days went on, it became clearer that a decision had to be made. Maria and Paolo were getting more insistent about taking Bella back to Italy. They weren't forceful, but every conversation seemed to circle back to the same point. They believed Bella belonged with them. But Bella? She was confused. One minute she was with her biological parents, and the next she was clinging to me. It wasn't fair to her, and I knew that. I was dragging out the inevitable because I didn't want to let her go. She'd become my daughter in every way that mattered. One night, after putting Bella to bed, Gina and I sat on the couch, both exhausted from the emotional tug-of-war. "You know you have to let her go," Gina said softly, her eyes filled with sympathy. I didn't answer right away. I couldn't. I knew she was right, but admitting that felt like giving up. "She's happy here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Gina nodded. "She is. But she has a family waiting for her. You can't keep her from that." It felt like my heart was being torn in two. I loved Bella like she was my own flesh and blood. But Gina was right. Bella deserved the chance to know her real family, to reconnect with her roots. I wasn't her biological father, and as much as it hurt, I knew I couldn't hold on to her forever. The next morning, I sat down with Maria and Paolo. I told them that I was willing to let Bella go back to Italy with them, but only if they promised to keep in touch, to let her know that she still had a family here too. They agreed, tears in their eyes, grateful, but clearly heartbroken that Bella wasn't rushing back into their arms as they had hoped. We decided that Bella would leave with them at the end of the week. I spent every day with her, trying to make the most of the time we had left. Every moment felt heavier, like the final goodbye was looming over us, even when she didn't fully understand what was happening. When the day came for Bella to leave, it felt like I was losing a part of myself. She hugged me tightly at the airport, tears streaming down her face, not fully grasping that this wasn't just a short trip. "I'll come back, Papa," she whispered, clutching her stuffed animal. I nodded, trying to keep it together for her sake. "I'll be here waiting, Bella. Always." As they walked through the gate, Bella kept looking back, her eyes searching for reassurance. And all I could do was wave, even though it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, letting her go, but deep down I knew it was the right thing, even if it broke me. The days after Bella left were some of the loneliest I'd ever experienced. The house felt empty, too quiet. I'd catch myself looking for her, expecting to hear her laugh or see her running around the living room. But she was gone. Just like that, a huge part of my life had disappeared. Gina stayed close, checking in on me, but I could tell even she wasn't sure how to help. I was lost. I tried to keep busy, but everything I did reminded me of Bella. I'd see her favorite spots on the beach, her toys still in the corner of the living room, and it would all come crashing down. We kept in touch, though. Maria and Paolo did as they promised. They'd send pictures and videos of Bella adjusting to life in Italy, her Italian improving, her bond with her little brother growing stronger. She looked happy, at least on the surface, but I could see it in her eyes. She missed me, too. We had video calls every week. Bella would light up when she saw me on the screen, calling me Papa in that sweet voice that never failed to break my heart. She'd tell me about her new school, her friends, how she was learning to bake with her mother. It was good to see her smile, but each call made me feel like I was on the outside looking in, like I was slowly becoming a memory in her life. Gina and I grew closer during this time. She was my lifeline, honestly. We spent more time together, talking about everything, from Bella to life to what the future might look like. I hadn't really thought about a future without Bella at the center of it, but Gina made me see that maybe there was still something worth holding on to. One evening, after another bittersweet call with Bella, Gina and I were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. She reached over, placing her hand on mine. "You did the right thing, Jim. She's happy." "I know," I said, but my voice cracked. "It just doesn't feel like enough." Gina leaned her head on my shoulder, and for the first time in weeks, I felt a little bit of peace. Maybe I couldn't have Bella with me every day, but I still had a chance to build something here, maybe even a new kind of family. But just when I thought life might be settling into something normal again, the universe threw me another curveball. Just as I was starting to adjust to life without Bella, the unexpected happened. It was one of those video calls with Bella and her parents, like we did every week. She looked a little pale, not her usual bubbly self, but I didn't think much of it at first. Kids get sick, right? Maybe it was just a cold or something minor. But a week later, Maria called me, and I could hear the worry in her voice before she even spoke. "Jim, we took Bella to the doctor. She's not well." There was a long pause, like she was struggling to find the right words. "They found something, cancer." My heart dropped. Cancer? Bella? It didn't make sense. She was so young, so full of life. I couldn't even wrap my head around it. Maria explained that they had found a tumor, and the doctors were already planning treatments, chemotherapy, surgery, the whole 9 yards. She assured me that they were doing everything they could, that Bella was a fighter. But I was helpless. Thousands of miles away, I couldn't do a damn thing. I felt useless. I wanted to be there with her, to hold her hand through the treatments, to comfort her like any father should. But she was in Italy, and I was stuck on this island, torn apart inside. The next few months were a nightmare. Bella went through chemo, and it was brutal. Every time we video called, I saw her looking weaker, her hair starting to fall out. But she always tried to smile for me, always tried to show me she was being strong. She'd tell me about the new friends she'd made in the hospital, about the nurses who brought her coloring books. But I could see the toll it was taking on her. I flew out to Italy as soon as I could. When I walked into the hospital room and saw her in that bed, hooked up to all those machines, I barely held it together. Bella's eyes lit up when she saw me, though, and she whispered, "Papa," like no time had passed at all. I spent every waking moment at her side, reading her stories, holding her hand, anything I could do to make her smile. The doctors were optimistic at first. They said there was a chance, a good one even. And for a while it looked like Bella was beating it. The treatments were working, and the doctors were hopeful. But then, out of nowhere, the cancer came back, stronger this time. And all those hopeful words from the doctors started to fade. I'll never forget the moment Maria and Paolo sat me down and told me the truth. The treatments weren't working anymore. Bella didn't have much time left. I felt like my world had shattered all over again. After hearing the news, everything felt like a blur. I couldn't believe it was happening. How could a little girl like Bella, who had already been through so much, be facing this? It wasn't fair. None of it was. I stayed in Italy for those final weeks. I wasn't going to leave her side, not this time. Maria and Paolo let me be there with them. And for that, I'll always be grateful. Despite everything, they knew how much Bella meant to me, how much I loved her. It wasn't about biology anymore, it never was. I was her father in every way that counted. Bella, though she was stronger than any of us. Even as her body grew weaker, her spirit was still there. She'd smile when I walked into the room, always trying to brighten the heavy air. We spent our days doing the simplest things, reading her favorite books, drawing pictures, talking about all the fun we had on the beach back in Hawaii. One day, she asked me, "Papa, will we go to the beach again?" My throat tightened. I didn't want to lie to her, but how do you answer that? "One day," I said, holding back tears. "One day, we'll go back to the beach." Bella smiled softly and closed her eyes, her little hand wrapped around mine. Those moments, as heartbreaking as they were, are ones I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Her condition worsened quickly after that. The doctors did what they could to keep her comfortable, but the light in her eyes was fading. Gina flew in to be there with me. I didn't even have to ask. She just knew I needed her. The night Bella passed, I sat beside her bed, my hand never leaving hers. She was quiet, peaceful in a way that made it almost unbearable. I whispered stories to her, trying to keep my voice steady. I talked about the beach again, about the waves she loved chasing, the seashells she collected, the way her laughter echoed in the salty air. She drifted away, sometime in the early hours of the morning. It was peaceful just like the doctors had promised, but nothing about it felt peaceful to me. The weight of losing her crushed me in a way I didn't think was possible. I had lost so much before, but losing Bella was different. She had changed my life. She was my life. When it was over, I sat there, numb, not sure how to move, how to breathe. Maria and Paolo held each other, devastated, but they gave me space to grieve too. We were all shattered, united by the love we had for Bella, but broken by the loss of her. Leaving the hospital that morning, I felt hollow, like a piece of me was gone. And the truth was, after Bella passed, something inside me broke. I went back to Hawaii, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Everywhere I looked, I saw her. On the beach where we used to play, in the house where she used to laugh and run around. It was like she was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I tried to keep it together for a while. Gina was there, doing her best to support me. But honestly, I wasn't in a place to be helped. I started drinking, not the occasional beer or glass of wine, but heavy, hard stuff. I wanted to numb the pain, to forget for just a little while how much it hurt. But the thing about alcohol is it doesn't take the pain away. It just buries it, and eventually, it all comes back up worse than before. Gina noticed, of course. She tried to talk to me, tried to pull me out of it, but I wasn't hearing it. I was angry at the world, at myself, and even at her sometimes, though she didn't deserve that. She'd say things like, "Jim, you can't keep doing this," or "Bella wouldn't want this for you." And I knew she was right. I knew it. But I didn't care. At that point, I just wanted the pain to stop. I started pushing Gina away. She'd come over, and I'd barely talk to her, just sit there with a drink in my hand, staring at the TV, pretending like it would all magically go away. She was patient at first, but after months of this, even Gina's patience started to wear thin. One night, after I had been particularly nasty, yelling, accusing her of not understanding my pain, she finally broke. "Jim, I can't do this anymore," she said, tears in her eyes. "I've lost Bella too, but I haven't lost you yet. But if you keep going like this, I will." Her words hit hard, but instead of waking me up, I sank deeper. I didn't know how to deal with it. I was drowning, and instead of reaching for the one person who cared about me, I kept pulling away. Eventually, Gina stopped coming by as much. Our relationship, which had been so full of promise, fell apart. I watched it happen knowing I was the reason, but I couldn't stop it. I didn't have the strength, or maybe I just didn't care enough anymore. Bella was gone, and without her, nothing seemed to matter. The drinking got worse after Gina left. I'd wake up, pour myself a drink, and go through the motions of the day, like a zombie. Friends, if you could call them that, started distancing themselves, too. Nobody wants to be around a guy who's slowly drinking himself into oblivion. I'd sit on my porch, staring at the ocean, wondering how everything had gone so wrong. I thought I could handle the pain, but it was handling me. And at the rate I was going, it was going to destroy me, too. I don't know exactly when I hit rock bottom. Maybe it was a gradual slide, or maybe it happened all at once. But one day, I woke up and realized I had nothing left. My days were just blurs of alcohol, self-pity, and regret. I barely left the house, except to stock up on more booze. My once beautiful home, the one that had seemed like paradise when I first moved to Hawaii, was now a mess. Empty bottles everywhere, curtains drawn, a place that felt more like a tomb than a home. Gina was gone. After that night, she stopped coming around altogether. I don't blame her. She had tried more than anyone would have, and I pushed her away at every turn. The worst part was I knew I was sabotaging everything. I knew I was destroying the one good thing left in my life, but I couldn't stop. It was like I didn't want to stop. The pain of losing Bella had swallowed me whole, and I didn't care about anything else. But the thing about rock bottom is, it doesn't wait for you to realize you're there. It just pulls you down deeper and deeper until you're staring at yourself in the mirror and wondering how you became this person. It was one of those mornings, I say morning, but it was probably closer to noon, when I stumbled out of bed and found myself in the bathroom, staring at the wreck I'd become. I barely recognized the guy looking back at me. My face was gaunt, beard unkempt, eyes bloodshot and hollow. I looked like someone who had been through hell, and honestly, I felt like I had. There was an old picture of Bella on the bathroom counter, one I used to keep there to remind me to smile in the mornings. It was from her first trip to the beach, when she was still that shy little girl who hardly spoke. In the picture, she's standing at the edge of the water, giggling as the waves crashed against her feet, holding on to that stuffed animal she used to carry everywhere. I picked up the photo, and for the first time in months, I really looked at it. I thought about all the moments we'd shared, all the laughter, all the small, quiet moments that made life feel full again after losing so much. Bella had brought light into my life when I didn't think I deserved any. She made me believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still something worth living for. But here I was, destroying myself because I couldn't handle the fact that she was gone. I was betraying everything Bella had given me, everything she had meant to me. I could almost hear her voice in my head, that sweet little voice saying Papa with all the trust and love in the world. I don't know what came over me, but I just broke. Right there, standing in front of that mirror, I broke down. The weight of everything hit me at once, the grief, the guilt, the anger, the self-destruction. I sank to the floor, clutching that picture of Bella, and sobbed like I hadn't sobbed since the day she died. I cried for hours, maybe longer. All the pain I had been drowning in alcohol finally came flooding out, and I couldn't stop it. But in a way, it felt like the first real thing I'd felt in months. When the tears finally stopped, I sat there exhausted, still holding the picture. That's when it hit me. Bella wouldn't have wanted this. She wouldn't have wanted me to spiral out of control, to throw away my life, because she wasn't here. She fought so hard during her short time on this earth. And here I was, giving up on everything. I knew deep down that it wasn't going to be easy. There was no switch I could flip that would fix everything. But I also knew that if I didn't start trying, I'd never pull myself out of the hole I'd dug. And as much as it hurt, I owed it to Bella to try. I owed it to her to be the man she called Papa, the man who had taken care of her, who had loved her like his own, and who had promised to always be there for her. That night, for the first time in a long time, I poured every bottle of liquor in the house down the sink. It felt like a small step, but an important one. I wasn't magically cured. The pain didn't vanish, but I was done letting it control me. The next day, I called Gina. It had been weeks, maybe months, since we last talked. I didn't even know if she'd pick up, but I had to try. When she answered, her voice was cautious, guarded. I couldn't blame her after everything I'd put her through. She had every right to walk away. "I'm sorry," I said, before she could even ask why I was calling. "I'm sorry for everything. I've been a mess, and I pushed you away when I needed you the most. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying. I'm done with the drinking. I'm going to get better." There was a long pause, and for a moment I thought maybe she'd just hang up. But then she spoke, her voice soft. "Jim, I'm glad you're trying, but you have to prove it to yourself, not just to me. I'm here, but you've got to put in the work." "I will," I promised, and for the first time in months, I actually meant it. That was the first step on the long road to piecing my life back together. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but if there was one thing Bella taught me, it was that even in the darkest moments, there's always a reason to keep going. And for her, I was ready to fight my way back. After that call with Gina, I knew things weren't going to fix themselves overnight, but it felt like a new beginning, even if it was a shaky one. I kept to my word and stayed away from the booze. Every day was a battle, though, waking up, facing the silence, the emptiness in the house, and resisting the urge to just fall back into my old habits. I started going to therapy. At first, it felt pointless, sitting there talking to a stranger about how my life had fallen apart. But slowly, piece by piece, I began to open up. It wasn't just about losing Bella anymore. It was about all the losses, all the grief I'd been carrying for years. Losing my job, Sheila's betrayal, and then Bella. It was like I'd been collecting heartbreak after heartbreak, never fully dealing with any of it. Therapy helped me start unpacking it all. And for the first time, I didn't feel completely alone in the process. Gina and I didn't pick up where we left off right away, and I didn't expect her to. But we started talking more, meeting up for coffee, slowly rebuilding what had been shattered by my downward spiral. She wasn't ready to jump back into a relationship, and honestly, neither was I. But having her back in my life, even just as a friend, was more than I could have asked for. I also found myself spending more time at the beach. It had been hard to go back there after Bella's death. Too many memories of her running through the sand, laughing, collecting seashells. But I needed to reclaim that space, to remember the good times, not just the loss. I'd sit there, watching the waves, sometimes imagining Bella's voice in the wind, and it gave me a strange sense of peace. Like maybe in some way, she was still with me. The grief never really goes away, and I've accepted that. But slowly, I started learning how to live with it, instead of letting it consume me. Bella's death was a wound that would never fully heal, but I realized that drowning myself in alcohol wasn't the answer. If anything, it was dishonoring the memory of the little girl who taught me what love and family really meant. I'm not perfect, and I still have bad days. Days where I miss Bella so much it physically hurts. Days where I wish I could go back and hold her just one more time. But I keep going, because that's what she would have wanted. Bella gave me so much in her short life, and I owe it to her to live mine in a way that honors her memory. I'm not fully healed, but I'm healing. And for now, that's enough.